Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous. This is another World War III report. Something crucial happened on Tuesday, October 27th that should have made screaming headlines. Not just ordinary headlines, screaming headlines. But it didn't. And you probably don't know a damned thing about it. It was the revelation of a trigger point for World War III. And the press said nothing. Here's what happened. On that Tuesday, Defense Secretary Ashton Carter and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chair General Joseph Dunford testified at a Senate Armed Service Committee hearing on U.S. strategy in the Middle East. That means U.S. strategy against ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, sometimes known as ISIL when they're really trying to confuse you. This is strategy in Iraq and more important in Syria, where ISIS has its headquarters in the city of Raqqa and where Russia is now using its warplanes to drop bombs. 33 minutes into the hearing, there were strong hints that John McCain wants war with Russia. Yes, you heard that right. John McCain wants war with Russia. Russia is one of the two greatest possessors of nuclear armaments on the face of the earth, and it has been increasing the number and capacity of its nuclear arms. It's the only major nation that, of the two, that are the nuclear leaders, the United States and Russia, that has been upgrading. And Ashton Carter, the Secretary of State, seemed to assure John McCain that in fact he could have his war under a Democratic administration. McCain asked the Defense Secretary if we will protect the Syrian forces that we train and equip. In other words, if we will protect those soldiers from some phrase he used over and over again, from barrel bombing. Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter answered that we have an obligation to what he called our Title X forces, apparently referring to the forces that we train and equip. But, said Carter, those forces are in northern Syria fighting ISIS, and they haven't been attacked by Russia and by Syria. McCain then revealed who he really wants us to protect militarily from the Russians. All the forces that oppose Bashar Assad, the dictator of Syria. All of them with the exception of ISIS. Yes, John McCain wants us to fight the Russians in Syria to protect what he calls the Syrian opposition. A note, you've seen this on my previous videos. John McCain is calling for the same kind of policy of topple the dictator that we used in Iraq and that we used in Libya. In both cases, toppling the dictator produced utter chaos and opened a power vacuum for, guess who? Our arch enemy, ISIS. So, John McCain made it clear that he'd also like to see us push back militarily against Vladimir Putin in the Ukraine. Now, look, McCain's policies could be the trigger point for a third world war. But there's an irony here. The forces most likely to attack the anti-ISIS troops, the troops that are fighting ISIS the most effectively, the troops that should be our greatest allies, the troops that we've just begun to support literally in the last 2 weeks, are not the Russians, and they're not the Syrians. They're the Turks, our allies, our fellow NATO members. Why? We've stopped the training and equipping programs that were a hideous embarrassment and that earned Barack Obama the title in foreign policy of being feckless. We've stopped equipping warriors from outside of Turkey, would-be warriors who sounded good on paper, but once we sent outside of Syria, that is, and who once we sent them into Syria dropped their weapons and melted into the distance, leaving their weapons for guess who? ISIS. We've stopped doing that. Now we have a new policy. It's one that the press, again, hasn't told you much about. Today, we're equipping a new alliance of battle-tested groups that literally pulled together roughly 2 weeks ago in mid-October under a brand new name. That new alliance calls itself the Democratic Forces of Syria. Who leads it? Kurds. Kurds are most effective allies against ISIS. And Kurds are the folks that our ally Turkey, our supposed ally, has been attacking viciously with its warplanes and bombs. The new Democratic Forces of Turkey, the new group, are led by the Kurdish YPG, and they include 3 Syrian Arab groups: the Jaish al-Tuhar, the army of rebels, and the Arab tribal Jaish al-Sanadid, and, here's the big surprise, an Assyrian Christian group, a group of Arab Christians. That's a first. This group of 3 Arab armies, small armies, has a new name for itself too. It calls itself, if I can find it down here, the Syrian Arab Coalition. The new alliance says that it's committed to secular democratic government. You can believe that of the Kurds. And it is likely to be a very powerful fighting force. Says Reuters, the Kurdish YPG has to date proven to be the most effective partner on the ground for U.S.-led airstrikes against the Islamic State. In fact, the Kurds, according to Reuters, have driven deep into the Raqqa province. That is the heartland of ISIS. Raqqa is ISIS's capital, Raqqa in Syria. And the Kurds have proven to be remarkably effective at penetrating that territory and even taking pieces of it back. Through the Democratic Forces of Syria, this new group, the Kurds are reaching out to Arab allies. That's something the Kurds have shown a genius for doing over the last year. Their political party has reached out to become the protector of all minorities in Turkey. And the result is that in the recent Turkish elections in June, the Kurdish party won 13% of the vote and 80 seats in parliament. Again, they're making another alliance, this time with the Arabs, this time in Syria. It's a good idea, and they may prove to be the protectors of many other minority groups. There's other good news. Our approach to ISIS is changing. Thanks to the Kurds, ISIS had 70 Iraqi and Kurdish soldiers that it had captured. It put them in cages and was parading them around the streets of Raqqa in trucks because it was about to execute them in a horrible and publicly televised, promoted on the internet way, just as a while back it burned a Syrian fighter pilot alive in a cage and showed you the whole thing on the internet. It was about to do that with 70 people. But again, our approach to ISIS is changing, and we sent helicopters and troops last weekend to support a team of Kurdish Special Operations Forces, and we freed all 70 of those captives from the middle of ISIS territory. We did it by cooperating with Kurdish Special Forces. So our strategy against ISIS may not be as feckless and as embarrassing as it was a mere 2 months ago. But the bottom line is this: Republican John McCain is talking World War III with Russia in Syria and in the Ukraine. And Democratic Defense Secretary Ashton Carter when it comes to Syria, is saying, yes, we are committed to a military strike against Russia if it strikes any of the forces that we are deeply involved with, our puppet forces, our proxy forces. We may need to show more military courage to Vladimir Putin. That may be true. But as important a matter as risking war with Russia should make headlines. It should be a matter of public discussion. Yet the media hasn't bothered to tell you about it. Is the media doing its job? No. I think it is not. This is Howard the Humongous speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make. Or, want to know why? Ask how. And now for that, impossible, sleazy, slimy, sneaky, seditious off button.